What's going on, guys? We're back, baby. We got a Preston Stewart video, and basically, it sounds like Ukraine is trying to offer Russia a way out. I think Ukraine knows that Putin is backed into a corner and doesn't want him to do anything out of desperation necessarily. So they're trying to show that there's an off ramp. Now, I don't know what that off ramp looks like. That's what we're going to watch this for. But please do me a favor, you guys, check out Preston Stewart, his channel. Like, share, subscribe over there, and then do the same over here. We're trying to blow this channel up, man. Getting to 50,000 subs is our goal, and we are at like 42,000, I think. So let's keep pushing, man. Lastly, I wanted to ask you guys, that I come up with like these crazy YouTube titles and thumbnails about orc barbecue and fried orc and orc shashlik, which shashlik is barbecue in Ukrainian. So I came up with this little design here and just kind of, for funsies. But I was curious if you guys, if you were able to, would you buy something like this and rock this in your home states, home countries? If so, then I'll get it made and then order a bunch. But let me know in the comments so I have an idea. If it's not of interest to you guys, cool, we'll move on. But I don't know, it's kind of just brainstorming here. So anyways, let's jump into this video and see what kind of pickle Russia is in.
Effectively, we can do this the easy way. So Ukraine just offered Russia a path to end the war, saying effectively, we can do this the easy way or we can do this the hard way. Now, while I wouldn't expect Putin to agree to this, it does show something that's being picked up in Russian media. For the first time in the war, Ukraine would be entering negotiations from a position of strength and could demand more than ever before. Again, not my words, but Russia's. It's also great timing for the first Ukraine aid package to pass the U.S. House of Representatives in 2 years, and more on that at the end of today's video. Now, yesterday, Ukrainian President Zelensky sent an open letter to the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin. The full text of that article or that statement will be in the description below. I'm going to pull out a couple of key segments to give you the overall gist of the message that was being relayed. He said, quote, "Whatever you may say about NATO, geopolitics, or the Russian language, this war is your personal choice. A war without a real cause. That is how history will remember it. We can all see that Russians are finally becoming less comfortable with this reality, with the fact that the war is bringing more and more negative consequences to Russia. They do not like our drones and missiles. They do not like gasoline shortages and constantly rising prices. They do not like the constant restrictions. They do not like your intention to launch a second wave of mobilization in order to expand the war into another direction in Ukraine or to use it against other countries neighboring Russia. They do not like the fact that there is no end in sight to your war." For what it's worth, we've been seeing more and more from the Ukrainian side talking about this second Russian mobilization that is kind of secretly in the works. We're hearing that a little bit from Russia as well, where more and more mill bloggers and war correspondents are saying that is probably being discussed, at least more in the conversation now than it has been in years. So interesting that Ukraine's kind of hammering on that as well. A big component of that is the idea that as soon as Putin has to mobilize more kind of average Russians, there's going to be more pushback across the country for this war and essentially more of a demand to bring it to a close.
Well, I mean, to me, it's math, right? It's just numbers, it's statistics. We've seen for the first time since this war, the past couple of months, Russia has taken a net loss as far as their military personnel. What I mean by that is they are losing 30 to 35,000 soldiers every single month, and they're not recruiting that many. They say they're recruiting anywhere from 25 to 30,000 soldiers a month. So if you keep taking net losses like that, the entire army personnel is just going to continue to decrease. You got to mobilize at that point. But Russia's pretty good at hiding what they have, right? For example, nobody thought that they could sustain as many missile strikes and drone strikes as they did in the first year. And they've managed to do it over the last 4.5 years and actually pick up frequency. So they've got some tricks up their sleeves. Maybe they've got a whole bunch of military personnel, soldiers in reserve somewhere, but I highly doubt it. I feel like they're very much in a desperate position when it comes to soldiers.
Zelensky says Ukraine has preserved its independence, and it will preserve it despite all predictions to the contrary. We have united many around the world to stand with Ukraine and against you. We found the weapons and the financing we needed. We received support. You received sanctions. And this will continue until there is justice for Ukraine, the justice we seek, and the justice that can be achieved. And Zelensky did lay out kind of a big picture view of what this path to the end of the war could look like. He says, quote, Ukraine proposes ending this war through direct negotiations between us and you, direct talks between Putin and Zelensky. He says that he proposes a meeting in Switzerland, Turkey, or the countries of the Arab world, many that are able and willing to host such a meeting. And he said he suggests they set a clear date for that meeting between the two leaders of the nations. He said Ukraine is ready for a full ceasefire for the duration of the negotiations, as well as an all-for-all exchange of prisoners of war. He said this could become a good prologue to ending the war. So again, at a high level, what Zelensky has offered Putin here is meeting face-to-face. And he does, throughout the course of the letter, say, it doesn't make sense for me to go to Moscow, and it doesn't make sense for you to come to Kyiv. Let's just scrap that idea. Let's meet at a neutral party. That's where he throws out Switzerland, Turkey, and countries of the Arab world. But then notably saying, let's set a date for the meeting, and while those talks are going on, a full ceasefire. Now, this is a bit of a trap that's being set for Russia in a couple different ways, and it's a smart move from Zelensky. From the Russian side, I want to mention that we haven't heard anything officially yet. Peskov, the Kremlin spokesperson, says that Putin so far has no response. Honestly, I wouldn't be shocked if Putin doesn't acknowledge this at all. There's been very, very little mention of this open letter at all in kind of traditional Russian media, but in the blogger space, we've got kind of a mix of opinions, and that's what we're going to jump into here. Maxim Kalishnikov, a war correspondent in Russia, says, quote, it is both an open challenge and an attempt to set up a political trap. If Zelensky's proposals are accepted, then Russia will not get the rest of the Donetsk region. This would mean a loss of face to our leadership. If we refuse, Zelensky will present himself as a peacemaker.
A loss of what face, dude? They've been losing their respect and dignity and their overall public opinion since the beginning of this. These leaders can't do anything. I mean, they've just been stopped in their tracks. So, I mean, it seems silly to me like that he would even bring that up, that they would lose face. They would be embarrassed. Dude, you guys are already embarrassed.
Shifting the blame to our leadership and intensifying the pressure of anti-Russian forces on Trump in the United States. As a conclusion, according to Kalishnikov, Ukraine intends to pressure and take advantage of both the growing systemic crisis in our country and Trump's increasingly precarious position in the United States. So the way that Kalishnikov is laying this out is it's kind of lose-lose for Putin at this point. And again, it shows, and we're going to hear this directly from some Russian sources in a moment, that Ukraine has the upper hand. It's just why they're proposing negotiations right now. Alexander Kotz, another Russian mill blogger, writing an article, and Kotz, for what it's worth, has become more and more just kind of like a mouthpiece for the Kremlin, which is not common across all mill bloggers, but Kotz is kind of taking the very, very hardline Russian stance, and is kind of one of the last holdouts of everything is fine, everything is on track, Ukraine is set to crumble any day now. So know that as a bit of background of Kotz. He says, quote, Moscow has repeatedly demonstrated a willingness to compromise, while Kyiv has demonstrated a stubborn unwillingness to negotiate. This, in fact, is precisely what the Ukrainian Führer demonstrated with his letter. It resembles less a peace initiative than his famous piano solo, just as stupid and tasteless. Now, this is one where in Western media, by and large, what we've seen is that Ukraine has proposed and offered up a number of different ceasefires especially since President Trump came into office, and Russia has always had a reason not to go along with it. And they say, well, we'll do that if, or maybe we'll consider it, all these other things. That's pretty accurate, though. I mean, you really have to stretch to say that Russia has been, as Kotz is saying here, that Moscow has demonstrated a willingness to compromise. For what it's worth, I can't think of a single instance that Moscow has willingly compromised. The closest we can come is when Steve Witkoff came back from like his first or second meeting in Moscow, and he suggested that Russia might be open to giving up territory in Zaporizhia and Kherson that they have occupied in exchange for all of Donetsk and Luhansk. But Moscow pretty quickly pushed back on that and said, no, you misunderstand. We are going to maintain the lines there. We're going to keep all of that territory. We're just going to focus first on Donetsk. So very hard to see at this point. And I'm open to pushback on this, but it's hard to see any area where the Kremlin at this point has really shown a willingness to compromise with Ukraine.
Agreed. I don't see it. I support the opinion that Putin won't even respond. How many of you guys watched that interview with Putin? It was yesterday, I believe, where he said that they haven't used the Orezhnik, which is basically their super missile, their hypersonic ballistic missile. They haven't used it in a combat capacity. Basically, they were using it as testing, and they wanted to send the missile somewhere where they had a good visual so they could see its effects. Where they sent that Orezhnik missile was into a civilian building. So there's kind of this outrage going on right now that Putin literally said, "We just wanted to test it, so we fired it into civilian infrastructure in Ukraine." Anyways, aside from that, I think so much of Putin knows how to play the game, dude, and he knows how to play Witkoff and Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, who, dude, I've been doing some digging, especially, I mean, the last handful of months I've already known, but doing some more intense digging about Kushner and Witkoff. And dude, they are so in bed with the Russians, man. I mean, making real estate deals in Russia, business deals regarding businesses in Russia. Like, what are we doing? Why are these two guys, Jared Kushner, who nobody knows who he is, he's just the wife of, um, or he's just the husband of one of Trump's kids, and Steve Witkoff, who is just as slimy as your local used car salesman, trying to sell you the broken, Hyundai Sonata in the lot. Why are these guys the ones who basically have the entire responsibility of bringing negotiations between Russia and Ukraine to the table? The guys that are actively in business and relations with Russians? That doesn't make any sense. Maybe if they had like an equal amount of coordination and cooperation and business with Ukraine, Witkoff had um, uh, businesses or homes in Ukraine or something like that. But no, it's just so obviously one-sided. It's crazy to me.
Now, Igor Girkin came out with, again, we can kind of expect this from him, the most frustrating assessment from the Russian point of view. Girkin is a Russian nationalist, convicted war criminal for shooting down a civilian airliner. He's currently under house arrest in Russia for his criticism of the Russian military. This is a man that wants to win the war and doesn't think that Russia is going far enough. He says, quote, "At present, any negotiations Ukraine will conduct from a position of strength. Our brave reports that we capture a village in a few days do not fool anyone at all. The front is actually standing still. The enemy is sharply increasing his strategic capabilities for strikes deep into our territory, for inflicting critical damage on our communications, transport facilities, oil and gas complex facilities, and industrial and military production facilities. At present, the enemy is on the rise, and our air defense forces are not able to repel these attacks everywhere." We are seeing that. If you're paying attention to this war, and we've talked about it countless times in recent weeks, this middle strike campaign is inflicting significant damage on Russian logistics and their ability to conduct operations at the front. And every single day for I don't know how many months now, we are seeing deep strikes carried out inside of Russian territory against precisely what Girkin is talking about there. Transport facilities, communications, oil and gas complex, military production facilities. That is noticeable. And it's not just noticeable to us in the West that are watching this play out on the news. It is arguably, for the first time in the war, noticeable to the Russian people. All right, some of these oil refineries that go up in smoke, you can't brush that under the rug and say nothing happened or everything was intercepted, especially when a specific facility is hit day after day after day after day. The fires get put out. The next day, more Ukrainian drones arrive. The Russian people, again, this is spreading. They're starting to notice that the war is coming home to them. And maybe all of the rosy reports they're seeing on the TV and hearing from the Russian Ministry of Defense, maybe don't line up with reality. Gherkin says, quote, in this situation, Zelensky will be in an exceptionally advantageous position at the negotiations and will demand even more than he could have demanded a year ago when these negotiations did not take place. In order to talk directly with Zelensky, we first need to achieve victories. Then we will be able to talk to him, at least from a position of strength. Now, if you go back to when President Trump first entered office and we saw what I would argue was a push from the Russian side to try to find some sort of negotiated settlement. They were open to the talks is the best way to put it, but a lot of what they were asking for and looking at was essentially a Ukrainian surrender. They wanted to accomplish their military objectives at the negotiating table, which is a thing that happens throughout war, and it's probably how this war is going to end as well. But at that time, we saw the shutoff of U.S. aid to Ukraine. There's reports that the U.S. was shutting off intel sharing with Ukraine. So Ukraine is facing a shortage of ammunition, likely a shortage of support, especially from the United States. And Russia was on the move. They were on the verge of taking Pokrovsk. I mean, I know they've been on the verge of taking Pokrovsk for a long time, but at that point, it looked like the city was on the verge of falling. Russia felt as though, and I think it's safe to say, they had the upper hand. They were advancing on the battlefield. Ukraine was not. Ukraine was losing support in the United States, and Russia felt like they had clear skies ahead. That's changed. And now that it's changed, Ukraine is the one proposing negotiations. Now, the timing of this is interesting because just yesterday, a few hours after President Zelensky issued this open letter to Putin, the U.S. House of Representatives passed the first Ukraine aid bill in 2 years. It's pretty notable. And I can't help but think of the General George Patton quote when seeing this. Patton famously said, quote, Americans love a winner and will not tolerate a loser. And what we have seen over the course of the last few months is a change.
Whoa. Whoa. That is such a good point. The U.S. basically slow walked and drug their feet on this massive aid bill to Ukraine. And now that there's been kind of this shift in the power dynamic, now they're like, all right, let's go. Send that over to them. Interesting.
Of the initiative. Ukraine has regained the initiative on the battlefield, and it is now Russia responding to Ukraine, trying to figure out how to stop these middle range strikes, trying to find new ways to advance on the front because they aren't, at least not at any respectable cost. How to stop Ukrainian deep strikes in places like like Moscow and St. Petersburg at the start of the economic forum. It is Russia on the back foot right now, and a part of me wonders if American politicians are seeing this and saying, the tide has turned. Let's make sure we get behind Ukraine while there's still time. The New York Times says, quote, the House voted on Thursday to approve a new aid package for Ukraine and impose a fresh round of sanctions targeting the industries fueling Russia's war economy after 18 Republicans defied their leaders to join Democrats in support of a bill that runs counter to President Trump's agenda. They say the legislation, which passed 226 to 195, would provide $8 billion in loans to Ukraine and $1.8 billion in aid for military and security assistance. In addition to putting new sanctions on Russian-affiliated businesses and officials, it would also punish foreign companies, organizations, and individuals that attempt to evade sanctions in an effort to support Moscow. They say the vote was the first time the House has approved significant financial support for Ukraine in more than 2 years. Now, a quick note here, this is not done. Far from it. It's a notable shift, seeing Republicans move over and support an initiative that for a while now has only seen support from the Democratic side of the aisle. It's also a pushback against President Trump. It's a pushback against Republican leadership. That is notable. However, there are still a few steps here. This goes to the Senate now. That is likely going to be harder to pass. But expect a campaign there in the coming days. I don't know when the vote is set. If it were to pass the Senate, which is possible, not too far of a stretch, then it would need President Trump's signature. And right now, it looks like President Trump is likely to veto this legislation. The stance that President Trump has taken and the detractors in the Senate and the House have stated in recent days is that adding arms to Ukraine, providing additional assistance to Ukraine, and adding sanctions to Russia impedes President Trump's ability to negotiate a settlement to end the war.
Oh my
and
God.
I can understand that angle, but at this point, it doesn't have any teeth, personally. Look, if the negotiations were active and ongoing and we felt like a peace deal was close, sure, I can see wanting to step back and say, let's not muddy the waters any more than we are. That's not the case. Russia is not negotiating, has not negotiated in good faith. The way to get Russia to come around and actually negotiate is, as we've argued for a long time on this channel, pressure. And the way the United States can inflict pressure on Russia is through sanctions and through providing intelligence, military support to Ukraine. And that's what we're seeing the House of Representatives pass just yesterday. So we'll keep an eye on that. Again, big move. Arguably the biggest change in U.S. politics in regards to Ukraine in the last 2 years, but there is still a ways to go. But pretty notable that does come right on the heels of Zelensky offering Putin an easy way out of the war, as he put it. That's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.
I unfortunately would have to agree with Mr. P Money here. It makes no sense that if this finally got passed, right, this big bill, first one from the U.S. in 2 years, so roughly since Trump took office, if it got passed and Trump vetoed it, dude, because you know what Trump also recently did with Scott Bessent, the Secretary of Treasury? They also just extended the release of sanctions on Russian oil. So they just agreed for another, it's either 30 or 60 days to continue letting Russia sell their oil unhindered, which is giving them millions and multi-millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. In fact, billions. So it's crazy to me. He's not, if this was his take, right? If this was Trump's take that he doesn't want to do anything that would uneven his bias, that would make his bias unbalanced, just in case the U.S. is the mediator for negotiations. But he's not worried about how Ukraine feels about Russia releasing sanctions for Russia, right? It's not like he's doing this. He's having the same idea in regards to Ukraine, like, no, I don't want to piss off the Ukrainians, so we're going to keep the sanctions on Russia. No, he got in hot water with public opinion and with global public opinion when he started the war in Iran, and gas prices and inflation went up. And so what was his easiest way of what was the easiest way of getting oil into the market? Releasing the sanctions on one of the biggest oil distribution countries in the entire world, Russia. Drives me nuts, man. But when I heard that they are extending those sanctions, I was like, dude, just say, like, at least just be honest. If you want to take the side of Putin and the Russian Federation, just say it, dude. I would even have more respect for that, because at least he's honest, rather than doing these in the cloak and dagger, like behind the scenes. Like when they initially released these sanctions, it was at like 3 a.m. or something weird, where most Americans are sleeping. It's not going to get the max amount of attention. It was just like a really sketchy way to do it. Now they're extending it. And another example is him making Kushner and Witkoff what do they call them? He has this weird name for this position that he just like puts his friends into. I'm forgetting the name. Like, I don't remember, but he comes up. He has this term for Jared Witkoff and Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. Rather than saying like we're going to send our diplomats or we're going to send our Secretary of State Marco Rubio or something like that. No, he's like, I'm going to send these two guys because basically I'm homies with the one. We've made each other a lot of money, and the other one, he's married to my daughter, so he needs a job anyways. I don't know. Anyways, interesting stuff. I do think it's a smart play on Zelensky's behalf because, like I said at the beginning of this, everything is optics, and the more Zelensky can put forward examples of him coming to the table or willing to come to the table and Russia shutting it down, it shows the global optics show like, oh, look, Ukraine's trying, but Russia's not, right? Zelensky's playing Trump's game basically, and I have a lot of respect for Zelensky because of it. He realized, I think, around the time I realized when he went to the White House last year, and Marco Rub no, it wasn't Rubio. It was Trump and JD Vance just jumped his ass, made fun of his outfit, told him he doesn't hold any cards. Um, I think he realized then he's got to attack the situation differently. And ever since then, he's been interacting with Trump in a much more 4D chess way rather than just playing straight up checkers with America. He's appealing to Trump, appealing to Trump's ego, appealing to the things that basically get Trump to agree with what you want. So I respect it. I've noticed that with Zelensky. Anyways, so please like, share, subscribe. Go check out Preston's channel. That's all I got. I love you. Peace.